A Trip into the Darkness, Chapter 24. They had not been in his personal vehicle for more than 2 minutes before the young girl passed out with a cigarette in between her lips. Andres reached across the seat, grabbing the still lit smoke before she could burn herself or set something on fire. Opening his window, he threw the nasty thing outside. He had never been a fan of cigarettes or nicotine in general. He remembered in the early settlement days when tobacco plants had been worth the price of gold and men would kill for nothing more than a quarter pound of the stuff. Of course, he possessed his own tobacco fields, which he had made a lot of profit from, but he had never partaken in the smoking aspect of the business. He also owned multiple other fields in Colombia containing numerous precious plants. Some are illegal, but mostly illegal. In today's world, it was the illegal crops which brought him the most revenue. So this was the creature that caused the southern parts of Mexico to be swarmed with American natural-borns. Andres had come to Mexico for business and had been planning on leaving the country 4 nights ago. However, before he left, he learned from his sources that there was an infestation of Americans parading around different cities as they searched for something. Andres had assumed it was a girl because what else would bring so much vermin into such a poor country? It had been his curiosity that had made him decide to stay and wait it out. He had been sitting in one of the most popular local clubs when he had scented her walk in. It was rare to find a mortal compatible with immortality. It was even rarer to find a changeling wandering around without a keeper. When an immortal made their changeling, they were extremely territorial of them, as they should be. A young changeling was unpredictable and a danger to society. Having one trotting around the streets unsupervised could lead to exposure, something that his kind had worked very hard over the years to not do. The vampire that lost this gem deserved to be punished for his ignorance and laziness. It had not been her scent that had immediately interested Andres as he sat there waiting. No, it had been the wondrous pull on his energy. Strong and savage, unlike anything he had ever experienced. He was old and had been around many kinds of immortals, and that is how he was able to recognize what she was. Succubus changeling. Her luscious pull was faint as she entered the club, but when she felt his aura, her pull went from a misty tug as she fed from everyone around her to a hyper-focused drag directed solely at him. It had left him feeling lighter somehow and made him extremely hard in his designer pants. She hurried through the club to the back exit, and her pull disappeared. Andres had sat there with his raging heart on, contemplating his next move. Even his fangs had extended slightly in his mouth without his consent. Because of his age, he was very experienced with controlling his impulses. He was not a young vampire that was easily triggered by the smell of blood or other stimuli, yet there he sat like a young stallion ready to rout. He had finished his drink and decided to give her a minute before he stood up and followed her outside. He had not had a plan at that point. He assumed that she would be ravaged and would perhaps beg him for his ancient blood. It was a rarity that few vampires got the privilege to feed from someone like him. If she was nice about it, he might have let her taste him. Yet instead of begging him as he expected, or even acknowledging his existence, she ran away without even a backward glance. He'd stood in the dark alleyway, feeling confused about her reaction. Even if she was intimidated by his strength and power, he would have assumed she would be curious about him. He had debated chasing after her. With his status in life, he did not chase. That was until he heard her screams and his instinct took over. Andres had rounded the corner before he realized he was moving and watched as the natural-born vampire stabbed her in the neck with a needle. The young girl fought him like a trapped honey badger while screaming profanity. When the American mentioned the name Troy, Andres couldn't believe the odds. Could it be that she belonged to Troy Denhart, the tyrant who had helped block out Andres' business in the northern parts of North America? Troy was not a good man and had worked hard to keep out Andres' product for his own selfish gains. Perhaps if Andres were to acquire the girl, she could be used as leverage against that American fool. He had his gun out before he ever raised his voice. He knew the vampire would not release her, but it was always polite to give a person a choice before taking their life. Shooting the natural-born, he stood there, watching as the girl stumbled back, and he was finally able to get a good look at her. His stomach had dropped when he saw how far gone she was. Her skin was paper white, her eyes completely back. He could barely make out if she had a pretty face or not because it was so sunken in, like she hadn't fed in months, which for all he knew, she hadn't. Unfortunately, there are not a ton of immortals walking around that would allow her to feed from them without claiming her as their own. When she informed him to leave her alone and that she was traveling out of the country, he wanted to laugh. The girl was literally about to fall over at any moment, and still she denied him. Standing there, watching her, he continued to enjoy the luscious pull on his energy. When she pushed off the wall and tried to walk away, Andres made his decision. She'd be his until he figured out what to do with her. In this shape, she would have passed out with her face flat on the street in a matter of minutes, and then only God would know what became of her. He had not been prepared for what touching her would feel like. When he grabbed her, his breath left his lungs and his skin caught on fire. He wanted to push her back into the wall and ravage her famined body. Instead, he pretty much carried her to his waiting car and pushed her inside. Sitting in the car now, while staring at her, he was left with so many unanswered questions. How had she managed to get here from the States? And how had she not left a trail of bodies in her wake? Perhaps she did have a trail of bodies following her down here, and had somehow been able to cover it up. Was her sire truly Troy Denhart? And if it was, what would he do with that knowledge? When the car pulled up to the airstrip, Andres got out and went around to her side to open the door. Leaning in, he picked up her light frame and walked to board the plane. She opened her eyes and looked around. "What the fuck, man?" she asked. When she realized they were walking towards a jet, she started to fight him. "Put me down now. I do not want to go with you anywhere, and I'm certainly not flying there," she yelled at him, and when he did not answer, she switched to broken and horribly pronounced Spanish. "No, yo volver en el airplano. Yo soy una gratis mujer, no presto. Yo mato tu en el leche." He was not going to answer her when she was screaming at him in English, because she was going to board his airplane whether she liked it or not. Her pleas were not going to change anything. Yet when she switched to Spanish, he felt a smile spread across his face. He had no clue how she had survived living in Mexico with such bad grammar. She had also threatened to kill him with milk. Not the scariest of threats he had ever heard, but it was creative. "You are coming onto my airplane. You are not my prisoner, and you'll never be my prisoner, but I am taking you home with me. I'm also not a fan of milk, so being killed in its depths would be a real shame, but I guess you could try if you wanted. I wouldn't mind you holding me down whilst pouring stuff all over me for a while." He responded to the girl on his arms in Spanish. Instead of her yelling back, she narrowed her eyes at him with a look of confusion. He could tell she was trying to decipher what he had just said, but she didn't want to admit to her ignorance. On the plane, he sat her on the couch and stood above her. He wasn't surprised when she tried to shoot off the lounge and was prepared to push her back down. In her weakened state, Andres barely exerted any energy, knocking her back on the soft surface. After a couple of more attempts and a lot of hissing from her, the door to the aircraft closed and the plane started to move. Deciding that even if she stood up, that there wasn't much she could do at this point, Andres went to his seat and sat. Panting, the girl looked around like she was trying to come up with an escape plan. Digging in her pockets, she pulled out a pack of cigarettes and went to light one, after pulling it out of her pack. "No," Andres told her as he shot to his feet and grabbed the partly lit thing from her lips, crushing it in his hand. "Hey, I need that," she growled at him as she flashed her long, sharp teeth like a wild animal. "You cannot smoke upon a plane. It's dangerous," he told her like he was explaining something to a young juvenile. She acted like she hadn't heard him and simply reached back into her pack to get another one. "You hard-headed child," he thought as he got back up from his seat and grabbed her smokes and lighter from her hands. With the confiscated contraband in his grasp, he returned to his seat and waited for her reaction. She didn't say anything in response. Pulling the backpack off her shoulders, she opened it to pull out a vape. He decided to allow her to smoke from the electronic cigarette, deeming it safer than the alternative. As she sat there smoking the vape that smelled like grapes, she looked around the aircraft and kept glancing at him. He could tell she was nervous and curious. "How did you kill that guy? I thought vampires were supposed to be immortal," she finally asked him. Immortality simply means you can live forever without dying of natural causes. That stated, every mortal has a way to be killed. Vampires, for instance, die from wood going into their hearts, having their hearts removed, or a sure way to kill any immortal is to remove their head. Fire is another weakness that many immortals share. There are also things like starvation that can play a factor in the death of an immortal. He told her in a conversational voice. She looked at him and raised her eyebrows. Are there a lot of immortals wandering around? She questioned. Andres was surprised that she was able to maintain this conversation, considering how bad of shape she looked like she was in. There is a vast amount of us wandering about the earth and other realms, yes. Natural borns happen to be one of the more common kinds in our world. They have higher birth rates than others, and there are opportunities to create changelings like yourself. She cocked her head to the side and took another hit of her vape while she thought about what he said. You know, I'm not surprised. I've read a lot of literature, and it's a common trend for authors to discuss different lore and legends of monsters and demons. Humans had to have inspiration to base their tales from. A smile tugged at his lips as he listened to her talk. You believe in demons and monsters and all the above? Did you believe these things before someone forced you to become a changeling? Yes and no. I've always been open to anything. And why do you assume I was forced to make this change? She questioned him accusingly. Well, you are on the run from someone that obviously wants you back. You have also been trying exceedingly hard, from what I can tell, to not return. I can only assume you are running from the immortal that created you against your will. She did not answer him and just shook her head and stared out the window of the plane. She looked lost and sad. Her lack of response was an answer in itself. She was on the run, and from his guess would be from Troy Denhart. Andres wanted to move onto the couch and pull her into her arms or push her dirty hair out of her face. She looked like she needed comfort, but he doubted she would accept it from him. He wanted to keep her talking, but she seemed withdrawn. After a while, the girl picked up her backpack from the floor and started fishing around inside of it. He half expected her to pull out another pack of cigarettes, but she didn't. Instead, she pulled out a brown paper bag and dug within to retrieve a handful of white pills. Throwing them in her mouth, she chased them with water. Finally, she lay down on the couch and yawned. What did you just take? He asked. I don't even know, honestly. Just pills to help me relax. I won't try to kill you, she told him, closing her eyes. He wanted to ask her name, but her breathing became deeper, and she appeared to already be asleep. Continuing to watch her, he waited until he was certain that she was knocked out before making his move. Needing to learn something about her, Andres stood from his seat and retrieved her backpack to look inside. He took it back to his chair and sat down before opening it. The contents of the bag reminded him of a homeless addict living on the streets, which he assumed was exactly what she was. The brown bag of pills was full of different variants of opioids and heroin. He was certain that she had just taken the heroin pills. Not very intelligent of her to take those, while she was still drugged with whatever had been in the needle that American vampire had injected into her. Deciding that she would no longer be taking any of those, Andre set the bag beside his chair to be disposed of. He assumed she was using them to help contain her bloodlust. She would no longer have to worry about that because when they landed, he planned to ensure that she fed from him. Andre stopped himself before he looked back in her bag and contemplated why he wanted the girl to feed from him versus another. Others on his island would willingly offer the changeling their blood, yet the thought of her being that close and intimate with another made him angry. It had been a long time since he allowed a female to feed from him. It was a privilege he normally only shared with his lovers, and this young, strung-out female was far from being his lover. She was dirty, and her clothes had holes in them. He had bet money that she had not showered in weeks. Of course, life was hard on the run, so maybe she cleaned up nicely, and after she fed, her body would fill back out to be more womanly. Pushing that thought aside, he dug back in the bag. He found a jar of blood with only a few swallows left. Unscrewing the lid, he smelled it and found it to be from an older female, natural-born. Securing the lid back on, he found another jar that was almost empty of herbs. Smelling those, he discovered she was smoking a very popular blend of herbs that was often used by immortals to help calm and relax them. A nice blend of marijuana, wormwood, poisonous hemlock, and a couple other toxic plants that would kill a mere human if they were to inhale it. Andres had a stash of this in his own villa that he would willingly share with her if she wanted more. Setting the jar down, he found a few rocks and seashells at the bottom of her pack, along with different colored feathers and a few dried flowers. What an odd combination. The blue flannel shirt that was shoved within was the only piece of clothing. There were a few more vapes, a couple packs of cigarettes, lighters, a bag of beef jerky, and a folded map of North and South America that was in really rough shape. Lastly, he found a dead cell phone inside. When he pulled out the journal, he set her bag on the floor, leaning back in his seat. It would be a dire invasion of her privacy to see what she had written, but she was in his care now. Surely a glance within wouldn't hurt anything. Opening the worn brown leather book, he found almost every page to be packed full of poems, thoughts, and cries of her bloodlust and insanity. Skimming through the pages, he learned that this journal had been an outlet depicting the internal battle raging inside of her as she desperately tried to maintain her inner resolve to not become a rabid beast. There was page after page about the demon inside of her trying to claw its way free, and the horrors she had endured because of it. Some of her writing was beautiful and flowed with the craft of a professional author, and other parts were dark and screamed of an insane poet who had just broken out of the asylum. Writing. There is a beast that lives within. Blood and venom drip from the fangs that have taken the lives of many innocents. It is wild and desperately craves to be free. It sits and waits, it screams and demands. So trapped is he, trapped within an unstable runaway that only wants to win. Set him free and release the pain, for all we want is to fly in the wind. Burning flames are eating at my flesh. There is water rushing over my soul. I am fire, I am ice, I am alive, and I am burning. The parts relating to her raging lust made his heart rate accelerate and his mouth dry. Writing. I just need to be fucked, long and hard, by someone with the energy of a saint. I want you to make me love it and hate it in order to extinguish the consuming lust that controls me and keeps me hostage to insanity. A blinding, searing, aching need which has left me crippled on the floor, body on fire, begging for someone to give it more. Will you take me and ride me hard, fuck me until I am no longer an empty slut? Make me forget that I am nothing but a selfish whore, and for you I will always adore. Andres closed her journal and focused on calming his simmering lust. It was hard to do, considering that even while she slumbered, the girl fed from his sexual energy. She had mentioned in multiple sections of her writing that she needed to make it to the Amazon River. Her need to get there was vital, and she was running out of time. He wondered what she thought she would find down there in the depths of the South American jungles. Nothing good ever came from those jungles in Andres' experience. Even an immortal as strong as he and experienced as he could easily be killed by the dangers lurking in and around the Amazon. Brazil was not a country he would advise anyone to go and explore. She had also written about a cure that would be waiting for her after she found the mysterious Brino. He wondered if the vampire who had given the girl the blood and herbs was also responsible for filling her head with such lies and nonsense. Tilda. Many hours later, the plane started to descend, and a smile spread across Andres' face. It had been over a month since he had been back to his home, and he was not coming back to his island alone this time.